to me, so please, give him
She's
back!
such a pushover, no.
No.
She is incredibly skilled at Ars Megas, and even
We are back with more BlazBlue. Last time we finished the retrospective on the story side of things, but we're kind of doing this backward because I believe part 1 covers the making of BlazBlue in a way, and like some of the background to the development and stuff like that, which is something we've always been interested in. Like whenever I stream a game here on the channel and I get to a cool moment, I'm like, how did they come up with this, right? So
just kind of all that background information, yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully we get to that in this video. But of course, if you guys haven't already, make sure to go support Thorgi. Link to that is at the very top of the description, as always. King of Fighters.
hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Fighting
We shall
Game
get to you.
Retrospectives. And this year has been great for this show. We've covered some iconic franchises and cult classics, but for our final
that?
episode of the year, I want to go out with something different. I want to
So
go
many cool
out
fighting
with
games.
a dash of anime. No. More
We
anime.
gotta return to Guilty Gear for Venom
More
and
anime.
Unica.
No, more anime.
Oh, wait, is that Type Moon? I believe that there's a fighting game for that too, which a lot of people have been requesting that we check out.
I didn't know it had a fighting game either.
Yeah, there are Fate characters and, well, all the Type Moon characters in that fighting game. I forget
Interesting.
exactly what it's called, but I don't know. You might be interested in it considering you're a Fate fan.
Oh yeah, it's you and Keen's fault.
Nah. My bad for introducing you to a potential series that you might like.
You did this
No,
to me.
more anime.
What is that?
That Coco?
Magical girl
More
fighting game.
Anime.
I don't know.
That's cute.
Slightly less anime. Let's pull it back a bit.
Yeah, I'd say this is about where it would be on the
There it
spectrum.
is. Yes, folks, this is one of those games I've
pretty
been
anime.
looking forward to covering
Very.
ever since we
Like even
started
more
the
than
Fighting
Guilty
Game
Gear in some
Retrospectives.
ways.
It's a series of loads
Yeah.
of creative mechanics, stylish sprite work, and memorable characters. A game that largely defined the 7th generation of consoles, helped Arc Systems return to the world of fighting games, and has an appeal that goes beyond the FGC itself.
I've heard people say that. Was this like the make or break game for ArcSys? Like this is what put them on the map? I don't really know the company's
I
history that
wouldn't be
well.
surprised, but I don't know either.
Because from my understanding, BlazBlue is pretty damn good, but it's still more of a niche community within the fighting game genre. It's not like a Street Fighter or a Tekken sort of thing.
Well, I feel like anime fighters have always been kind of the the lesser fighter game fighters, right?
Yeah.
And I think among them, I think Guilty Gear is like considered the most fighting game, and then everything kind of trickles down from there. I don't know. I don't actually know much about fighting games, but that's kind of what I gathered listening to people who know fighting games talk about fighting games.
Yeah. From the anime fighters that I see at EVO, I only saw Guilty Gear Strive as well as Grand Blue Fantasy Versus, I believe. And all the other ones are more minor events that don't really go to the main stage.
Yeah.
I wonder why it is that the anime fighters don't get as much attention. Maybe it's because of the visual clarity, or maybe simply just the marketing around it.
I don't know. I actually have no idea on that.
Yeah. Well, I'll probably have to ask somebody who's more familiar with the FGC about that.
So today, the wheel of fate is turning as we dive into a world of beasts, robots, magic, whatever the hell this
Oh
guy
my.
is. And we talk about this series' development, the groundbreaking gameplay, and the lore that...
We've covered that already.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh god, right. I have to actually explain the story of BlazBlue now, don't I?
Look, when we learned about the Guilty Gear Strive lore, I would not take it upon myself to try and explain it to somebody who knows nothing about the series. I would just point them to Wooly Versus's set of videos and just like watch that. Because trying to explain it would be insane. Just like sitting down with your friend and talking about it. Ugh, yikes. You could make that into an 8-hour stream. But for BlazBlue, I wouldn't even fathom somebody actually doing that. This is like the best way to get out of your Tinder date is to just sit there and talk about BlazBlue.
Is it too late to go back to Waku Waku 7?
I don't. What is that game? Waku Waku 7. It's cute. The Legend of Zelda. Blood Edge that was actually Blood Edge. The man, the myth, the legend, and his nail. And Carl!
Yo.
Freaking Carl! Can't wait to stream the game and learn what all these bars mean. And how to freaking activate any of that. Practice Guilty Gear Strive so much, but I still drop inputs.
I never had inputs to begin with. I tried, I really did.
Yeah, it takes a lot of practice. And especially because you didn't understand the numpad notation, or that wasn't really your preferred way of learning. It made the process a lot harder, I would say.
Yes, welcome to another episode of the Fighting Game Retrospectives. And folks, I am not kidding when I say this is a big one. And for once, that's not because of some crazy development problems, although believe me, there are going to be a couple of those too. No, on this show, we tackle the behind-the-scenes stories of your favorite fighters. But we also tackle the in-game stories. We talk about the characters and the plots of these series, and I have to get this out of the way right now. If you know anything about BlazBlue, it's that this game has the craziest, most complicated story in any video game. Not in any fighting game, games, period.
I feel like
more
that's
than
still
Tekken,
a bold statement. I bet I could find one.
I can't think of one off the top of my head, but video games in general, especially a lot of Japanese video games, have some of the weirdest out there stories
they
ever.
Can get convoluted, yeah.
Very.
I feel like the thing that BlazBlue has going for it is just like numbers, because there's been so many games. But I bet you there's some weird standalones out there.
Actually, if you guys know of any like super weird out there video games, let us know some of your favorites. Might check them out in the future, because we kind of enjoy the convoluted mess.
We like this stuff.
Yeah.
than Metal Gear, more than Kingdom Hearts, even more than Guilty Gear. I can sum up the plot of Guilty Gear in a tweet.
Mankind knew that they cannot change society, so they started reflecting on themselves and blamed the beasts.
It's a pretty good summary.
Read that while listening to some Queen music, and you're good. The plot of BlazBlue?
Gotta listen to the BlazBlue music at some point too.
Yeah.
That was 5% of one game. So I'm sure that some of you tuned in today thinking, oh man, I can't wait to finally learn the plot of BlazBlue. And to you, I have to apologize, because after studying everything that I could, after going through all the story modes and reading all the wikis, I have come to the conclusion that the story of BlazBlue would be too long and too complicated and require far too much explaining to fit in here with the development and the mechanics and everything else that we have to cover. So no, I'm sorry, but we will not be covering the story in this video. For later. That's what part 2 is going to be for. Yes, folks, this is going to be a two-parter. Part 1 will cover the development and gameplay and features of each individual game, as well as giving you a very basic introduction to the characters and story. Then part 2 will be the actual breakdown of the plot.
He explains
I decided to do this because, as I said, this story is so big and complicated, it would make this video a jumbled mess trying to fit everything together. But also because, honestly, I know there are a lot of people out there who just want to know what the hell this story is, and they just want a video only about that. They don't want to sit through me talking about the gameplay, so for those people, I think they'd be much happier just getting their own video. So if that's you, then make sure that you click that subscribe button so that way you'll know when part 2 comes out. Also, just going to throw it out there right now, but we set a
got
goal
us
at the beginning of the
hooked,
year to
Thorgi.
hit 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and we are
Let's go.
so close right now.
Actually,
so
how-
if you do decide to subscribe, then thank you. I really do
almost
appreciate
100K.
that. But for now,
Nice.
let's
Come a long
talk
way.
about BlazBlue's creation.
Heck yeah.
The story of how the BlazBlue universe was born began several years before the first title was even pitched, and it was birthed from the dying ashes of another fighter, Guilty Gear. Yes, if you know your anime air dashers, then you've probably heard these two compared quite often, and for good reason. Their histories are deeply tied to each other. Guilty Gear was the predominant fighting game franchise for Japanese developer Arc System Works, and while it
okay.
never sold as much as Street Fighter, or Tekken, or Mortal Kombat, or Darkstalkers,
Ooh.
or Star Gladiator. Yeah, look at the sales
What?
figures on
Really?
Guilty Gear sometime.
Are you kidding me? Although, I suppose before Strive, Guilty Gear was still more of a niche anime fighter. Trying to think back on the history.
I feel like Xer did well, but maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, I would think Xer did well too, considering how good that game looked, but maybe not.
I mean, I knew about it, but I also worked in game development at the time, so we talked about it a lot in class. So maybe that's where my angle comes from. I don't
Yeah,
know.
probably. I think it was mostly Strive that brought it into the mainstream.
It could be, yeah.
Yeah. Although a lot of the changes that they made in order to bring it to mainstream were pretty controversial among the older Guilty Gear fans, which is why, I
Always
think
will
that's
be.
probably where it changed, yeah. It's kind of like some of the deeper themes in P3 and P4, but then you kind of go more lighthearted with P5, just slightly more, in order to attract a wider audience, So yeah, I could see some of the complaints, but it's still a fun game, at least in my opinion.
I mean, ultimately, and I've said this many, many times, right?
Yeah.
If a series isn't working, then you have two options, right? Let it die or change it. And a studio is always going to choose to change it if they think there's a possibility of saving it. As a fan, you can enjoy the older stuff more, but you have to realize that the only reason something currently exists is because of those changes, and you can't get mad at new fans coming in who enjoy that.
I think that's one of the beauties of the fighting game community, is that if you join like the specific communities for the game that you like, even if they're really old games, you can still get matches and play with people online. And
Yeah.
so in that way, you can still enjoy what you enjoy, and the company can make what they need to make in order to survive, and it all works out in the end.
Its early games did not do well. But despite those sales, it did
Jam.
have some of the most stylish sprites, quickest combat, and inventive mechanics
looked
of
really
any
cool,
game out
yeah.
there, and it built up a fan base that was fiercely dedicated to it. And I'm including myself in there. I've loved Guilty Gear ever since X2.
Hell yeah.
The moment I saw every insane thing this game was capable of, it instantly became one of my
It's
favorites.
a cute stage.
But what does all this have to do with BlazBlue? Well, Guilty Gear was a very personal
Totsugeki,
project for its
goddamn.
creator, Daisuke Ishiwatari. He had built up this massive world and long-running story connecting all these games, and you could feel how much he loved these characters. Hell, he even voiced the protagonist of the series. This was his baby. So you can only imagine how much it must have hurt him when he saw his creation taken away from him. You see, Guilty Gear, with its sleek graphics and crazy story modes and all the work that went into them, cost a lot of money. Money that Arc Systems didn't always have. So most of their games were published by Sammy,
Unfortunate.
meaning they owned the rights to them. And Sammy for years had been trying to merge with Sega, but Sega kept telling them no. But Sammy was determined, so they kept waiting, watching for the
Interesting.
moment that Sega slipped up. And speaking of Sega slip-ups, the Dreamcast!
Oh no.
And the Saturn! And the Sega CD. Okay, there were a lot of slip-ups back-to-back. It wasn't exactly one thing that did Sega in. But after the fall of the Dreamcast, Sega hit rock bottom, and Sammy was there to take advantage of it. They merged with Sega to create the new Sega Sammy Holdings Company, and gave them all their properties, including Guilty Gear. To which Sega said, thanks.
Thanks.
Oh no.
I guess Sega didn't really know what to do with that.
Unfortunate.
It's like getting a fruitcake at a birthday party or something. Thanks.
Yeah, Sega really had no interest in making someone else's fighting game. Hell, they barely had any interest in making their own fighting game at the time. And I should clarify, yes, Arc Systems could still technically make a Guilty Gear game, but it wouldn't be the same. because Arc Systems owned the rights to the characters from the first game, but any character after that now belonged to Sega. So, if they wanted to make a new game, they couldn't include characters like Dizzy or Eno or so many other characters who were very important to the story, and Daisuke really cared about that story. So, even though he tried to make a new game that could work around these restrictions, it just wasn't the same. Also, it wasn't a fighting game, and it kind of sucked, so yeah, it had that going against it. So,
What?
I did not know about that. Dude, we might have like covered some of the lore of that in Woolie's video, but I didn't see the gameplay of that, or don't recall it. That's a very interesting take on Guilty Gear, that's for sure. Granted, like even BlazBlue has the platformer game, the hack and slash platformer game. So
I was gonna say Guilty Gear also had the pachinko. So like, is it less weird?
You know, I prefer anything over the pachinko one. Not gonna lie. I do think it could be cool though if you got like an actually well crafted like hack and slash action game like that for the Guilty Gear universe. I think it could work.
I think you definitely could, yeah.
I mean, you have the world of the characters for it.
When you have a world and characters, you could probably make just about any kind of game genre. You just have to like invest and do it well, and that's usually where people fall flat.
Yeah. We need the Guilty Gear hero shooter.
Eventually, Arc Systems had to accept that Guilty Gear was gone. Their standout franchise was now the victim of corporate IP shuffling. So Daisuke knew that they needed to create something new. They needed to make a fighter that could carry on that game's legacy and bring it into a brand new era. So that's when Daisuke got the brilliant idea to step aside and let somebody else take the lead.
Hey.
Yeah, sorry for that mislead, but I had to bring...
Look, sometimes you have to know when it's not your time to shine. And you gotta step aside for somebody else to take the reins. I respect that.
It can be tough decisions, but yeah.
And if the company survives, that's what matters, yeah? At the very least, in the future, you can still continue to make the thing that you love. You just, for now, gotta invest in something else.
Years, I can't tell you how many people I've heard say that BlazBlue was made by the same guy who made Guilty Gear. And while Daisuke did work on the soundtrack for BlazBlue, and he did help provide its creator with guidance during the initial development, Daisuke...
Oh, throughout the entire story, you can see exactly where the guidance came from, and some of the inspiration that was drawn from the Guilty Gear series, that's for sure.
Ishiwatari did not create BlazBlue. No, that was Toshimichi Mori, better known by his fans as Mori P. Mori and Daisuke had been friends for years, even before they started working together. The two of them both attended the Osaka Music Media School to study game design.
Guilty Gear and BlazBlue definitely gives me like Danganronpa Zero Escape vibes of just kind of, you can tell their creators are really good friends and they share notes.
I wonder if this is just a regular thing when it comes to game development in Japan. Because for Steins Gate and the science adventure novels as well, like it's all just a group of friends who like the same thing and all make visual novels based on sci-fi. And so they like agree to make them all the same universe. So yeah, I think it's just a cool collaboration thing. And where people can bounce ideas off of each other.
You can see all of their like influence on each other. It makes me happy.
And fun fact, the reason Mori decided to go to that school in the first place was because a pop idol he liked occasionally gave lectures there. And I just find that hilarious. I mean, imagine if the reason that Mori...
Like, why else would you go to a school? That's as good a reason as any. Probably a better reason than most people.
Mortal Kombat came into existence was because Ed Boon and John Tobias went to college together, but they only went to that school because they thought that it would somehow help them meet Debbie Harry. And I can't find out who that idol was, but...
Or maybe it's just that fighting game creators are all nerds. Maybe. Just maybe.
Couldn't be.
But I really do wonder if she has any idea she's indirectly responsible for an entire universe of games existing. Daisuke would end up bringing Mori onto Arc Systems as an artist, working on Guilty Gear X and other fighters, even creating the fan-favorite characters of Abba and Robokai. But after so many years
Mori created Abba and Robokai. That's awesome. Oh, I think I saw a comment actually from somebody who said that Mori voiced Paracelsus, and
I saw that comment. Yeah,
yeah, That was pretty cool. I mean, given the fact that Daisuke voiced Soul, it's only fair that he voiced his own creation, or well, the abusive, toxic relationship that he created, I suppose. That's probably what Mori's into.
When you think about it a little too far, so we'll just step back. And go, it's cool that he got to voice this character.
I don't know. Maybe Mori's got a thing for yanderes. I'm not gonna kink shame the guy.
Can't be weirder than Kiwi's taste.
Oh man. Oh, and just in case people like want to clarify me or something, I know that Amma technically isn't a yandere, but it's pretty damn close.
I mean, I feel like the only thing drawing the line there is the fact that Paracelsus just kind of plays with her. So
it's close enough, but like I know some people get pretty antsy whenever she's referred to as yandere.
Games, he decided to challenge himself to create his own. He pitched his idea to Minoru Kitaoka, the head founder of Arc Systems, who knew that with Guilty Gear gone, it was time to create a new franchise. But the creation process of the series would be not exactly a difficult road, but a road with many different ideas and voices, especially when it came to the title. Together, Mori and Kitaoka agreed that the theme of the game should be blue, quite possibly to separate itself from the overly red aesthetic of Guilty Gear. So, with that in mind, the series took on many early names, with the original title being, and I kid.
That's so funny. I love that though.
So
we don't have the story, the plot, or anything, but it will be blue.
I mean, it's another primary color. A lot of famous video game characters are either red or blue, or a mixture of both. It just works. So if you already have a franchise that's red, makes sense to me.
Usually primary colors are considered like children's colors. You play into primaries when you're trying to make content for children's usually. That's kind of one of the unspoken rules, I suppose, of design. I don't know.
Really? But like famous characters like Mario and Sonic, they're basically just red and blue, a mixture of both. And it just works.
They're prime examples of it, yeah.
You not blue bloods. And speaking as someone who understands English and realizes the connotations of that term in this language, holy crap, did we ever dodge a bullet there. I don't think this series would have sold nearly as well if its name implied that it was all about wealthy aristocrats fighting over their inheritance. The name was eventually changed to Riot Blue, which was the title that they planned on sticking with. But apparently at the last hour, and I mean that quite literally, apparently just 2 days before they had to release the first arcade machines, they found out that there might be a copyright issue around Riot Blue, so they had to change it to BlazBlue. And I think I speak for all of us when I say the better name won out. Now, when development began, both Kitaoka and Mori agreed on one thing. The new game would have to be simpler. Kitaoka thought that while Guilty Gear X was great and helped the company make a name for itself, he said that with every update, and boy were there a lot of updates, the game got more niche and the barrier for entry became higher, appealing to...
That is always a concern for any developer. Honestly, that might be the answer to my question then. Why the anime fighters aren't as popular at eval. It's because there are so many mechanics that the casual viewer wouldn't understand. And so as a sport that is, an esport that is watched on YouTube or Twitch or whatever, you'd have to be super into the game to know what's going on. That's probably why.
Interesting.
And
Could
like, I know that one of the main complaints for Guilty Gear Strive is the fact that they simplified a lot of the Roman cancels, which I don't know if it's a mechanic that you know of in the game. I think we talked about it briefly.
You mentioned it before, yeah.
Yeah. It's there's a bunch of different Roman cancels in Strive, but apparently before that it could be used for way more things. And so there was like hidden tech in order to use it in order to cancel animations and stuff like that, or in order to continue your combo, or more advanced things that I wouldn't know of because I didn't play those games. I just know that they simplified it. A lot of people didn't like it. A lot of people did like it. There's just the back and forth there. And
sure. I
suppose BlazBlue tried to tone it down, despite us looking at it right here and right now, and we don't really know what's going on. But once we get into it, we'll probably figure it out.
I mean, that's me looking at any fighting game, though.
I definitely think anime fighters sort of fall into the same category as grand strategy games in a way. because the UI is just so daunting sometimes, or like some of the mechanics you don't really understand until you play the game and you learn about them, which probably makes them more niche in general. But like, super cool to explore.
A smaller fan base and making it harder for new players to start. So, if this new game was going to be the beginning of a brand new franchise, it would have to be accessible enough to bring in a wider audience. And this was a sentiment that Mori agreed with, saying, "I thought the Guilty Gear franchise became too difficult as a game. I wanted to simplify a lot of it, to kind of reset the fighting game platform."
That is one heck of a goal. Because
Yeah.
actually, in a wider aspect, fighting games in general are just, they just have a high barrier to entry, which is why so many people find it daunting and they don't want to play fighting games or are too scared to even try.
Fighting games, people might get mad at me for this, in the same category as MOBAs, in that just the idea of learning it is scary for so many reasons. Because there's a lot of mechanical skill behind it, there's a lot of just game sense behind it, and a oftentimes very toxic community behind it. I think fighting games are a lot better than MOBAs in that category, but the mechanical skill's a lot higher, so
Yeah. I would say the main difference with that is, well, MOBAs are a team game and they're much more popular in general. Whereas for fighting games, I think people are more accepting because we're already kind of niche. So if you try to gatekeep your own community, it's going to die. You're not going to have a sparring partner if you continue to do that.
It has to stop people before zero. It has to stop people before. No, you're right, though. I think...
The general sentiment, not like the outliers out there who get mad at me every single time I like try to do a lore video on Guilty Gear and get something wrong. I'm sorry that you feel that way. Go and watch somebody else, please. But yeah, it's just hard to try and get the casual player into a fighting game. And how do you figure that out? Because fundamentally, fighting games just aren't appealing to the majority of the audience. They're pretty cool to watch, but to play, a little harder.
The only fighting game that I can actually think of with a casual audience is Smash Bros.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a different sort of fighter.
And I feel like that's kind of it at its most bare bones.
Yeah. Because the competitive Smash is pretty insane. But casual play, I would say Super Smash Bros. Takes the cake, and no other fighters really come close to it because of all the different mechanics that they introduced to it, making it a lot lower of a barrier to entry, for sure.
Well, and they have game modes in it specifically meant basically for casual play.
And like the use of random items. It introduces
kind of the ability to trigger the Smash Ultimates or whatever it's called. It's just called Super Smash, isn't it? I don't know.
I don't know. I don't play Smash either.
With a build charge, or different things. So it's like, I feel like they got creative with a lot of ways to make it interesting for a casual audience. Whereas I feel like most fighting games don't have anything outside of just the pure competitive mode. Even if you don't play it in a competitive setting.
I mean, heck, most fighting games before then didn't really have much of a story mode to it either. So like you couldn't really enjoy it on your own. It was mostly just fight somebody else, which, not too appealing to a lot of people who don't like PvP.
And honestly, this wasn't a bad idea. I know that when it comes to simplifying fighting games to appeal to a wider audience, it's kind of a sore subject for the FGC. I know that most dedicated and professional players hate it, but the truth is, sometimes it does help. I've heard so many dedicated fighting game players say that all you need to bring in new players is cool characters and good visuals. And while that does certainly account for a lot, I can say as someone who
they won't stay.
That's the issue. The reason why I wanted to try out Guilty Gear was because the lore was very cool and I liked the characters. I thought the moves were flashy. I thought the gameplay looked really smooth. And I wanted to learn that, but it was because there were so many resources around it that helped me learn the game, which is why I was able to stick with it and somewhat master my character.
Coming from the other spectrum, though, I also came into it because I really like the characters and I like the art just a ton.
Yeah.
But it's just over my head and I probably won't keep playing it, which makes me sad, but I'll just have to enjoy it from watching other people play it.
Oh, no. Yeah, even with striving to introduce themselves to a wider audience, there is still that barrier to entry to learn it. It's just fundamentally baked in.
Games is my takeaway.
You never know. You might find one eventually, Survey.
Never know.
It might be BlazBlue, might be something in the future.
The possibility.
Fighting games are just super cool. Once you learn them,
so
it just
cool.
clicks, you know? But yeah, I get it.
I've never had that.
Someday you will. Someday. There's got to be a day.
It'll be the dumbest fighting game you've ever seen, and I'll cry in a corner for a different reason.
It's Waku Waku 7.
Yes. In that weird blurry world between dedicated and casual players? Yeah, I've heard so many other people in my life say they didn't get into fighting games because that barrier for entry was just too high.
Hey, want to play a fighting game?
I'm not really into fighting games.
It's okay. I'll take it easy on you. Okay.
Oh no!
Cool. Let's play.
He does like an infinite combo on you. What the fuck?
Want to play again?
No, I think I'm good.
No, I'm not saying.
Yeah.
That was me learning magic.
Oh man, that is unfortunately very common, because taking it easy on you in what context? Like, do you truly understand the level of play that your friend is currently playing at, right? Granted, I have seen plenty of people talk about their experiences of playing like with kids who are interested in the game, and so they like let them win a few times in order to encourage them to play. Like, that's very nice. It's just bringing new people into the community. But yeah, not everybody's like that. It's just super hard to gauge. And I certainly wasn't like that when I was practicing against Serby, because I didn't really know what I was doing either. So yeah, it was just unfortunate.
I feel like it's a hard genre to try and go easy on, because if you know like the button inputs, right, you can't just not press them, right? It's kind of like someone who knows how to draw trying to pretend like they don't know how to draw. It's just a step back that's really hard to take.
There's also a level of, if I go way too easy on them, it would be disrespectful. But yeah, if you go all out on them, then they would be too discouraged to even play in the first place. So it's hard. I get it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A new series for a brand new console generation, and you're hoping to bring in a brand new audience? Yeah, making that first game very accessible and then increasing the complexity with each later installment is probably a smart idea. But even though Kitaoka and Mori wanted to simplify the game to appeal to a wider audience, there was one decision they made that was actually kind of bold for the time and did run the risk of turning away new players. I mentioned this before, but in the mid-2000s, 2D fighters were kind of dead. If you were making a fighting game, everyone believed it had to be 3D. Who cares if 2D fighting games have their own unique charm and completely different tactics and gameplay? The PS2 and the Xbox era were the age of 3D fighters.
Yeah.
So if you're making a fighting game, you better get on board.
I always think it's funny how there's an aesthetic that people expect as technology gets better. Because this is something that we saw for a long time that we've only just now started getting away from, is this idea that as graphics improve, you need realism. And for some reason, I feel like that switched from 3D to 2D got tied with that. In film, too. It's like it showcases better technology or something, but the level of artistry is the same, just different. It's really odd to me how those kind of get conflated.
I definitely think it's more of a media of the time, where in like 20 or 30 years from now, we'll look back at the media nowadays and be like, yeah, it reminds me of the 2020s or something like that.
Well, that's the funny thing with 3D, but with realism in general. 3D just showcases it more, right? Mm-hmm. Is it ages like milk.
Oh, yeah. Yup.
You can look at any 3D game, and especially if they went for a more realistic art style, and you could probably pinpoint exactly when it was developed.
Yep.
You get a little like hazier now because they all kind of just look the same, and we've hit kind of a ceiling. But when you make something stylized, 3D or 2D at this point, it's like that just ages better. You can go back to the first Kingdom Hearts game and still like look at that visually and enjoy it it's very stylized. It's very what it's meant to be, and that ages so much more gracefully than anything going for realism, and it always will.
It's the classic case of style beats realism. It's just how the rock, paper, scissors go. Because, yeah, as you said, like, how much further can you go when you're already able to see the pores in the face of an NPC? Like, I don't need to see more than that. I feel like we're pretty good when it comes to that. My graphics card is already dying. Please,
Right.
just optimize the game better. Don't make it more realistic. God, some people did.
I don't care about the cores. I care about the frame rate and how it runs. Let me play the game so I can look at it.
It is funny, though, how back then they didn't realize the charm of 2D fighters. Yeah, it was probably just all the rage and, like, companies being like, oh, we gotta jump on the new trend of 3D games and technology and all that to showcase
It was
our...
like when Toy Story first came out and everyone was like, oh, 3D movies are the future.
Good movies are the future.
To be left behind. But they both realized that the 2D sprite-based anime aesthetic was one of the defining appeals of their company. It's one of the things that screams Arc System Works. So even though it was a risk, they weren't going to budge on it. And I'm glad they did, because these sprites look great. This became one of the best looking sprite-based fighters out there. You could go frame by frame and just see how much love and attention went into bringing these characters to life. I mentioned in our Darkstalkers episode how that series would go on to inspire an entire generation of sprite-based anime fighters.
I gotta watch that.
And Mori has admitted that Darkstalkers had a huge impact on him. And you can see that in just how lively these sprites are. You can see it in the exaggerated expressions they make in combat. I mean, whenever a character gets electrocuted, they turn into a cartoony skeleton, and that is straight out of Darkstalkers. And speaking of those characters, if you look at this cast, they might feel a little all over the place, and there's a reason for that. You see, while this was Mori's creation, Arc Systems was a tightly knit company. Rather than one person dictating every aspect of a game, instead, everyone was allowed to have a say, including in the character creation. So while Mori did create several characters himself, such as Hakumen, who he had created back in middle school and had been holding on to ever since, many of the other fighters were created by other employees at Arc Systems. For example, the big grappler of the game, Iron Tiger, was made by a self-proclaimed bodybuilding fanatic at the company, and I love that. I can't help but picture some giant muscle-bound dude over at Arc System Works just going around and shoving developers into lockers until they agree to put grapplers in the game.
This is a beautiful image, and I love everything about it. Was this perhaps the same person who advocated for Potemkin?
I can only imagine.
It's great, though, that everybody has a hand on the project. It just feels like everybody is working together to make this a great game, as opposed to different departments in modern AAA studios that just work on their part, and then they're like, yeah, hopefully that works for the game. And then when you stitch together, it's not great.
That was always why I was never interested in working in a AAA studio back when I was working in game development. Because it's very much like you work at Microsoft and you are a single cog in a much larger machine, and that is all you will ever do. Whereas when you work at a smaller studio or an indie studio, it's like you actually are a part of the full production. You have to wear a lot more hats, and there's a lot more stress involved, and a lot of other problems, which is why I left the industry. But like, right, you actually can contribute and work on that passion with everyone else.
You're making a lot less money, but I think what you get out of doing that sort of work is much more than what money can buy. That's just a personal point of view from me.
Well, they've always said you go into game development because it's a passion and you want to make stuff. Because if it's not, you would be in a different industry.
100%. Like, why in the world would you be here?
And it's unfortunate that it has to be that way, but that is how it is.
I think that is how it is for basically any job that you get into that requires a level of creativity or creation in general. Or even sports. Sports, you get into it because you have a passion for the sport, not because you want to make a whole lot of money.
But the important thing is that by having so many voices in the creation process, it made BlazBlue feel kind of all over the place, but I mean that in a good way. You see, sometimes BlazBlue can feel less like a unified world and more like Anime the fighting game.
We need to know.
It feels like dozens of characters and ideas taken from all over the place shoved into a single world, but that was kind of its charm. It gave this game a crazy, colorful variety that a lot of other fighters were lacking, and sure, to some people it might have been overwhelming, but to a...
I think this probably is the answer to why some of the designs are like super out there and like so different from each other, which I guess you wouldn't really see in other fighting games potentially. I don't know. We haven't looked at too many fighting games, so I can't really make that statement. But I feel like a lot of designs should usually be coherent with each other, whereas for BlazBlue, there was a lot of ideas that were thrown into certain characters that didn't really match very well.
I don't know that I would say BlazBlue is the most incoherent. Like, I feel like you definitely have characters that break a mold, kind of like the big muscly guy, right?
Yeah.
But at the end, it still shares a pretty cohesive art style, and that whole kind of eclectic look is just the vibe. So I've definitely seen other things that are more discongruent for far less justifiable reasons.
That is true. I've seen some reviews from Mandalore with video games that literally have like characters that feel like they came from a different game or like are in a different art style to everybody else for some reason. So yeah, this game doesn't have that problem. I think it has to do with how the world was structured too. Like with the way the world is, it makes sense for there to be such a variety of characters with very different goals and just ways that they dress and ways that they present themselves. So it lends itself to the idea of the creation process.
Certain audience, this variety in tones and designs hit just right. And this menagerie of ideas extended to the game's story, which...
Yeah, we can tell.
Oh, God, the story. Yeah, okay, as I said, I'll be talking about the actual story itself in its own video, but I do need to bring up the inclusion of the story in here because it did play into the game's development. For starters, I mentioned that Toshimichi Mori had been working at Arc Systems on Guilty Gear and some other fighters like Battle Fantasia, and he was a fan of Darkstalkers, but that doesn't mean fighting games were his first love. No, Mori has said multiple times he got into game development because he wanted to make RPGs. He wanted to create a big, sprawling world with massive stories
so
that stretched on for dozens and dozens of hours.
You can see that.
He just kind of fell into working on fighting.
This definitely feels like if Mori could create a Skyrim in the BlazBlue universe, he would. And I think it would work too.
Honestly, yeah.
Games because he knew Daisuke Ishiwatari and Daisuke got him to Arc Systems Works. In fact, I've actually heard from multiple people that Mori originally pitched this game to Kitaoka as an RPG, but Kitaoka wanted them to make another fighting game after losing Guilty Gear, and that's how BlazBlue morphed into a fighting game.
I see.
I will admit, I haven't been able to find any actual interview where he actually says this, but when you play through the game,
you feel
it certainly feels like that's real. Because every single BlazBlue game has a massive story mode, longer than anything you had ever seen from another fighting game. And this was back when story modes weren't even a given in fighting games. Nobody was really thinking beyond just having a simple arcade ladder back then. However, while I'm sure that Mori pitched these story modes because he literally had been building up this story in his head since middle school and he wanted to make sure that it got out there into the world in some form or fashion, he did say it was also part of his strategy for selling the game. You see, he wanted to make sure that these games had something beyond just the combat to try and bring in players. In an interview with GamesBeat, Mori said, quote, "Instead of thinking of it as just a fighting game, I wanted to turn it into a single piece of content, an intellectual property. And that way we could deploy it through many different mediums because we have a lot of cool characters here. Fighting games were still a very niche genre back then. So it really needed to have its own identity where it would be able to translate into multiple media. And translate...
It's just niche now. It's not very...
It's hard to really define the threshold. I still think it's pretty niche, though. This sort of mindset is very good. I like the way this guy thinks. You know, franchising, branching out, several different mediums to express your story in, you know? And it's because of that sort of thought process that it creates such a unique story for a fighting game that people can enjoy. It has its own style, and I don't think anybody will ever be able to get remotely close to it because of that.
It did. The story of this game would become a huge selling point that would influence how the future games were released and would translate into animes and mangas and so much more, many of which would create their own original content that would then feed back into the main series itself. Again, this was a very forward-thinking approach. Mori went into this project not just planning on creating a game, but a multimedia empire. But I'm getting ahead of myself. All the spin-offs and the
What the
side
heck is
stories
going
and
on
the
here?
alternate reality tales, and yes, that is actually a thing, wouldn't come from much later. For now, it's time to finally delve into where this all began. BlazBlue Calamity Trigger launched in arcades in November 2008 and on home consoles in June 2009, where it was hit with a wave of praise right off the bat. It received some of the highest scores of any fighting game in the 7th gen. When it came to the combat,
Wow, yeah.
yes, this game was simpler compared to its Guilty Gear brethren, but as I said, that did help it appeal to a wider audience. I originally saw this game over at a friend's place, and while I had already been a big Guilty Gear fan, my friend never got into the series. But he was loving BlazBlue, and I can tell you the simpler combat definitely helped get him hooked. He could actually understand what he was doing in this game. And
Yeah, that is a pretty big issue with a lot of fighting games. I'm loving what I'm hearing, though. I have very high hopes now. Survey, this might be the game. Please, let it be the game.
We'll see.
Oh, man. I'm hoping for another Marvel Rivals situation, but we'll see.
You never know. I can't discount anything anymore.
speaking personally, having gone back to this game after playing the most recent installments, it is kind of jarring how different it feels from where this series would end up, but it's still incredibly fun, and it still comes with plenty of its own crazy anime fighter mechanics. Like many games at the time, you had a super meter called the heat gauge, and you could use 50% of that meter to use your supers called distortion drives. But you also had a barrier gauge, and you could hold down 2 buttons to put up a barrier to prevent chip damage and block attacks that normally couldn't be blocked. But as you did this, you would eat up your barrier gauge, and if that gauge got fully depleted, then you would enter a danger state. And in this state, you would take 50% extra damage. So yeah, big reward, bigger risk.
Gotcha. That's a pretty similar mechanic to like blocking in Super Smash Bros. And I think in Guilty Gear Strive we also have something similar too.
You could also hit every button at once to perform a barrier burst, which would blow your opponent back to give you some breathing room. But it would also completely destroy your barrier gauge, and I already told you why you don't want to do that.
Okay, so yeah, it's like a Roman cancel. I believe it's like a yellow Roman cancel in Guilty Gear Strive, where it's like a burst where you use your energy and then you stop your opponent's combo so they don't get comboed into infinity and just die. Yeah, makes sense. I guess this is just like standard fare for anime fighting games, especially considering how long the combos usually get for a lot of them. You have to have some way to stop your opponent, or else you're literally just going to put down your controller and wait for a few minutes.
So you better think if getting out of your opponent's combo is really worth that gamble. And just like how Guilty Gear became famous for its instant kills, BlazBlue created a similar mechanic with the Astral Heats. However, the instant kills in Guilty Gear were easy to pull off. You just hit all the buttons at once to activate it, and then you hit your opponent before the meter runs out. Boom, that's it. Fairly simple for something that let you instantly win the round.
What the heck?
But Arc Systems wanted BlazBlue to be...
The old man has a dragon.
What's the word I'm looking for? Oh, right. Not horrendously broken. So they put a ton of restrictions in here. To pull out these Astral Heats, you would now have to have your heat gauge at max, enough to perform 2 supers. And your opponent would have to have only 20% health left, meaning you could probably finish them off with just one of those supers. And you would have to be on match point. And I don't mean that if the match was 1st to 2, then you would have to have 1 win already. No, that makes sense. I mean, if it was 1st to 2, then you would have to have 1 win, and your opponent would also have to have 1 win. Yeah, if you wanted to pull off an astral heat, it would have to be in the last possible remaining seconds of the last
They want this
possible
to be
round.
the literal, like, anime hype moment.
Which works very well for the series, I must say. And I believe somebody in the comments said that theme song does play during the astral finisher here, so yeah, that's
Beautiful.
definitely what they're going for.
That is an insanely specific situation, and while I imagine if you ever pulled it off, it would be hype as hell, I can also imagine some people probably playing through this entire game and never even
getting
knowing
to
that this was a
get it.
thing.
Yeah.
However, here's something else really weird about the astral heats, and by weird, I mean flat out unfair. When this game begins, only 3 out of the 12 characters have their astrals unlocked. All
What?
the remaining characters can only unlock their astrals if you beat their arcade mode. Meaning, if you decide to get this game,
Interesting.
open it up, and then just plop down on
You
the couch
have
with your
to play
friend and
the arcade
instantly
mode.
start playing against each other, there are 3 characters who just automatically have an advantage over everyone else.
Oh,
Sure, it's a very specific, probably will never pull it off advantage, but it's an advantage nonetheless. This might be the only game I have ever heard of where it came purposely broken and you had to unlock the balance patch. And speaking of unbalanced, if you already had the character's astral unlocked and you then played through the arcade mode again, you would unlock the unlimited version of that character. These were crazy enhanced Super Saiyan versions of each character that you could only play in offline mode, which makes sense. It would be way too unfair to take the unlimited characters online. But you and your friends picking 2 unlimited characters and having an over-the-top crazy busted slugfest?
That'll be an
that's
anime battle
perfectly
for
fine.
sure.
Go nuts. But when talking about the mechanics of BlazBlue, what really made this series stand out was the drive ability. You see, BlazBlue was sort of a 3.5 button fighter. Because you had your 3 basic attacks, A, B, and C, essentially light, medium, and heavy. But
Okay.
then each character had their 4th button, the drive button. And this was a unique ability for every single character with wildly ranging effects. For example, Ragnar's drive was a large attack that would recover some of his health. Jin's drive let him freeze his opponent. And Rangel's drive wasn't even an attack. She was a character all about setting up objects and traps to mix up your opponents, so her drive let her control the wind, which could push her and her props around.
Oh, I never knew Rachel was a trap zoner. That's a very rare archetype to see in a fighting game, but that's cool. Glad that we have one in BlazBlue.
And just speaking personally, this drive ability is one of the best things about BlazBlue. It provides so much variety to these characters. Each fighting game has a range to what their fighters can do, and to understand the game, you need to understand that range. And the range of abilities in BlazBlue are so wide that I'm sure some people might find it exhausting, but I love it. It made every character feel new, and no matter how many fighters were added to this series, I always got excited to see what they could do. I record a lot of footage of these games, and even late into the 4th installment, I still wanted to keep playing and running through the arcade with these characters because it was always a brand new experience. And I've always said that one of the best things about fighting games is that there is a character out there for everyone. No matter what your playstyle is, no matter what your taste may be, you will find that character that is for you. And with the variety in drive abilities and playstyles mixed with the creative cast of characters, BlazBlue is the living embodiment of that mentality. And speaking of that, let's go ahead and talk about these characters. Now, as I said, I'm going to save the big details about the characters for when we actually talk about the story, but I do want to give at least a little bit of rundown on each of them. Which means that you do need a little bit of info.
Wait, the cat's name is Nago? Nago Ryuki, what happened to you? Oh, God.
On what the story is. This series is set in a world where 100 years ago, a giant monster appeared called the Black Beast. It rampaged across the world for years, but eventually 6 heroes appeared to fight back. One of these heroes developed a new type of technology called grimoires, which allowed humans to use an artificial form of magic called Ars Magus. With these 6 heroes and the armies of man now using Ars Magus, humans were able to fight the beast and eventually destroyed it. Unfortunately, when the beast died, it let loose a wave of toxic gas called Seether. To survive this new poison fog spreading across the world, humans had to retreat to the tops of mountains and build brand new cities, known as hierarchical cities. After the war, a new military force known as the Novus Orbis Librarium, aka the NOL, aka the Library, declared they would decide who could and could not use Ars Magus. People rebelled against this, leading to a civil war in the land of Ikarga, resulting in the NOL killing the Ikarga leader and making themselves the police of the entire world. Now, in each hierarchical city, there's an NOL branch, and in the NOL base, there's something known as a cauldron, which serves as a gateway to a dimension between realities known as the Boundary.
I half expected him to say we'll get back to this later.
Seether. This seems like a very dangerous thing to constantly be tapping into, but since Seether powers the NOL's grimoires, that's why they keep these cauldrons running. But it's also because they believe that at the center of the Boundary is the most concentrated form of Seether imaginable, known as the Azure, which is said to be so powerful that if you got your hands on it, you could reshape reality. So, now that we've got all that established, who are our fighters? Our protagonist is Ragnar the Blood Edge. When he was a boy growing up in an orphanage, his arm was cut off by his brother Jin, his sister was abducted, and his home was burned to the ground. So yeah, he's got a lot of baggage. His life was then saved by Jubei, a talking cat who, despite his size and appearance, was one of the 6 legendary heroes from 100 years ago. Jubei then replaces Ragnar's arm with the Azure Grimoire, said to be one of the strongest grimoires imaginable, with the power to, as you can probably guess, tap into the Azure itself.
Not gonna lie, I'm really glad that we actually did the story one first, because we got the reveals as they happened, and it was like, what in the world? As opposed to already knowing the summary of the characters before going in.
Ragnar now travels the world trying to bring down the NOL by destroying their cauldrons. Next up is Ragnar's rival, his aforementioned brother Jin, who not only joined the NOL, but even killed Ikarga's leader and was hailed as the hero of the Ikarga War. He's a high-ranking officer in the NOL and is always very serious and professional, but he's also a complete a-hole who treats everyone around him like trash, and the moment he hears his brother is headed to the cauldron in the city of Kakatsuchi, he loses his mind, goes AWOL, and becomes obsessed with tracking him down. Working under Jin is the final part in our trio of heroes, Noelle Vermillion. She was an orphan who doesn't remember much about her past, but despite being such a punching bag in the series, that's actually kind of pathetic at times.
Oh no.
Give it back, please! Those are important! They're really important to me, so please, give them
She's
back!
such a pushover, no.
No.
She is incredibly skilled at Ars Magus and even possesses a set of guns that are some of the most powerful grimoires on the planet. Next up, the big grappler of the game, Iron Tiger. He's a mountain of a man who's all about business and all about carrying out his missions, and he works for a super scientist named Kokonoi, who is part of Sector 7. Sector 7 is a group of scientists who oppose the NOL. I personally love Tiger, not just because he comes off as a good dude, but also because he's a grappler whose drive ability allows you to magnetize the opponent and pull them in.
What?
Just saying that sentence alone is enough to give some people nightmares. There's Bang Shishigami, a ninja from Ikarga, who is trying to help other survivors from that war.
Wish Potemkin
He's got a
had that.
big heart and he cares
He would've
about
hated him even
everyone,
more.
but he's also kind of an idiot at times, and he often gets used as a source of comedy. Carl Clover is a vigilante who hunts down criminals alongside the giant doll that accompanies him, and as I'm sure many of you can guess, he is a puppet fighter who controls his doll with his drive button. He also refers to this doll as his sister, which will be important later.
What?
Next is Rachel Alucard, a vampire who, despite her appearance, is actually hundreds of years old and has helped to guide Ragnar in his quest for years, even though her superiority complex frames all of her help through insults.
She do be bystanding.
Ling is a doctor working in Kakatsuchi, the city where the first game takes place, but she has a mysterious history that largely revolves around our next fighter, Arachne. This blob of darkness and insects used to be a scientist working for Sector 7, but he became so obsessed with finding the Azure inside the barrier that he fell inside of it and... Well, yeah, this is why you don't want to expose yourself to too much Seether. It tends to make Cronenbergs happen. Then there's Tau Kaka. She's part of a race of cat people called the Kaka clan, and despite being the protector of said clan, she basically acts like a hyperactive kid who just wants to eat. Hakumen was one of the 6 legendary heroes who fought against the Black Beast, and now, for some reason, he is obsessed with the idea of murdering Ragnar. Wow, him and Jin have a whole lot in common. I bet they'd get along great. He's also one of the more unique fighters in this early game, as he uses his own special meter for all of his moves that slowly builds up on its own, which admittedly can make doing some combos very complicated, but he deals massive damage, so it is worth that work. And lastly, the boss of the game, Nu 13. She's what's known as a Murakumo unit, a type of android designed to go into the boundary. She's super robotic and emotionless. Unless she's fighting Ragna, then she becomes an obsessed
Fully
fangirl.
yandere.
Also, she's made of like 90% knives and swords, and she fights like the most zonery zoner in fighting game history. And that is your roster and premise for BlazBlue Calamity Trigger. Okay, I know that was a lot, but I promise that's about the most story you're going to get in this episode. If you could listen to all that without your head exploding like that guy from Scanners, then congrats. Yes, folks, this series' plot is complicated, and the world of BlazBlue already has a massive wall of lore as soon as the story begins, and about 7 more walls of lore that won't be revealed until later games, even though they start referencing those later walls of lore in the very first game. I mentioned that Mori P started thinking up these characters in this series back in middle school, and this series totally has that vibe of story you thought up 20 years ago and you kept hanging onto it in your head for years before you actually wrote any of it out. And to everyone who thinks I'm being too harsh on the story, even Mori himself said this story is a jumbled mess. In an interview with Red Bull in 2017,
At least he
Mori was
knows.
asked about his inspiration in creating this story, and he said, and I quote, "Actually, I just created a world combining a lot of things that interest me. Though I admit in hindsight, it was probably difficult at times for players to follow along." And speaking as someone who had to figure out this story for this retrospective,
no.
I would like to respond to that comment with an overly sarcastic, "No! The hell you say?"
You know what, Maury? You do you. You know, throw all the ideas that you have into your world and see what sticks. It worked out.
But I want to make something clear. As crazy complicated and flat out incomprehensive as this story can get at times, it is still totally possible to enjoy these characters without knowing anything about the plot. I had several people talk to me while I was working on this video saying they don't understand the story at all, but they still have a close attachment to these characters because their personalities and their relationships still manage to come through even if you don't understand the basis for it. And I totally get that. I had zero idea what the plot of BlazBlue was until like 2 years ago, but I still really enjoy these characters because these games give them so much personality, whether that be in the actual story mode itself or in the combat. There are so many unique interactions between specific characters when they fight, whether that be unique in-round dialogue between characters or in the intro animation.
Interactions and
I mentioned that
like in the actual fight.
I think they're really cool, and I wish to see more unique ones. I think they're sort of the highlight of fighting games too, especially if you already have pre-established lore and you have fans of that lore. Like, come on, you have to have these moments between characters that you know would interact with each other in this sort of way. Or,
Yeah.
and the other way is like introduce people who maybe don't know too much about the lore, but get intrigued by this introduction that these characters have, this unique interaction between the two.
Yeah, it gives you more vibe to the characters to be like, yeah, I mesh with this one too.
voice lines, and that's something else that I have to bring up about these characters. The voice acting in Japanese is great. I think the actors each nail their characters, especially Tomokazu Sugita, who plays Ragna and brings a gruff, beaten down anger to that role. But this was one of the first times that I ever heard a Japanese fighting game get not just an English dub, but an actual good English dub. Yeah, at this time, if a Japanese
Pretty
fighting
rare,
game got an
yeah.
English dub, it was
Especially back
typically
then.
pretty bad. But BlazBlue had an all-star cast of some of the biggest dub actors out there, and they each brought their A game to this. Mello Lee brought this elegance and snobbishness to Rachel that made her seem wise beyond her appearance. Jamison Price gave Tager this stoic all-business attitude. Philly Sampler, who sadly passed away recently, gave Tao Kaka so much energy and charm. Patrick Sipes as Ragna nailed every over-the-top attack that he had to shout out, and I gotta applaud David Vincent, who
Unfortunately, I don't recognize the names, but I might recognize some of the characters that they've done since then.
Yeah. I'm so bad at knowing voice actor names, Japanese or English or any of them. But I usually could, look them up and be like, yeah, I know this character.
I probably pay more attention to the voice actors than most people do, but I don't recall any of these people voicing games that I played, or at least the games that I've looked up the actors for, like Three Houses, for Persona and stuff like that.
probably blew out all of his vocal cords every time that he had to say, "I get to kill you again!"
Let's kill each other! Ragnar! No one else to
God.
kill you!
The hero of Ikarga, everybody. Don't get me
Jin.
wrong, I know there's some people out there who still prefer the Japanese track, and that's totally fine. But it's been my experience that the BlazBlue English dub has been one of the most positively received dubs in fighting game history. And I think a lot of that is because
That is an
this cast
accomplishment. understood
the assignment. No matter what insane thing they
I feel
had
like
to
even
say,
good
they
English dubs still get so much hate.
Yeah, it's the dub versus sub category where
Mhm.
even if, the dub is good, some people just hate on it simply for being English, which I think is stupid. Like,
Yeah, I agree.
actually look at the quality of the voice acting first before judging it, please. And for those of you who haven't checked out any anime in the English dub, look up some reviews on it. Like, if you're ever interested in watching Steins Gate, I can assure you that the English dub brings something totally new and very fitting still to the series. It's almost like watching a completely different show, but it still goes on in the same direction because the voice actors do such a good job at it, at bringing the characters to life.
I was more recently dawned it on. I watched it both subbed and dubbed, and phenomenal. There's moments where I feel like the dub actors almost carry harder than the sub for some scenes.
I could say the same thing too about Steins Gate with some of the differing jokes that they had to retranslate because it didn't work in English. I wonder when and where English dubbing got so much better, because I do recall in the early days of dubbing, it was laughable, really. But then all of a sudden it just got peak. Like, who started that?
Well, anime as a medium was a lot shorter, and you had companies like 4Kids who deservedly went bankrupt. But
yeah, I wonder why.
Companies like Funimation and Crunchyroll are probably the ones that are the main reason that dubbing increased. It also made anime more accessible internationally, so they could grow that marketplace for it, so they could invest more into voice actors. Other than that, I don't know if there's any specifics that really helped kickstart it, other than just rise in popularity of anime internationally.
Maybe it's more like the increase of popularity to anime internationally made more fans, meant that more people who actually knew about anime started to voice for anime characters, and so they knew what to do for them, as opposed to just saying things.
Originally, it was just a very, how do you say, there was no money in it, so the voice actors that were hired for it were, it was usually not a good gig, shall we say, and it wasn't something that was really taken super seriously a lot of times, even for the people hiring it.
Gotcha.
So, but as I said, as anime got more popular and it became a more oh yeah, this is actually something people care about.
More incentive for money to be made here, so we care more about it. Okay.
Gave it their all. Listen, you heard the brief plot synopsis I gave? Well, the full version is about 20 times more complicated with 50 more made-up nouns and verbs. So I guarantee most of this cast didn't know what anything they were saying meant.
They were
but they
just
still
shouting at the
delivered
top of
those
their
lines like they
lungs.
did, and God bless them for that. And they had to record a lot of lines for this because, well, it's time that we finally talk about
The
that
fact that
story
his
mode.
voice like
Again,
that
not
is
really-
actually pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's not just text that you read, which a lot of games still do. A lot of JRPGs still do.
Even ones that are fully voiced in Japanese often still to this day don't get fully voiced in English.
Again, not really in terms of the plot, but in terms of the structure. Because this wasn't just a massive story mode, it was also a very different type of story mode. Every single character has their own story, but those stories can diverge in different ways. You'll be given choices to make which can determine where the story goes, but you can also change your path by losing certain fights or finishing fights with supers. And as a result, each character has around 3 different endings that you can get. And here's the crazy thing. Every single one of these endings contains some bit of information that is going to help you fill in this story. I mentioned the plot BlazBlue is super thick and hard to comprehend, but I gotta say, playing through each story and getting all the different endings was actually fun because each time that I got an ending, I went, wait, so they said this thing here, and in this character's ending, they said that thing, and those 2 things can mean this 3rd thing. Playing through the story mode gave me that satisfaction of putting a puzzle together when you get those 2 good pieces that finally match up. In fact, you even sometimes get important bits of information from losing a match. And I don't mean the story-related losses that send you off in a different direction. No, I mean the fights that you're not supposed to lose. Every time that you lose a match, whether you were supposed to or not, you get unique dialogue, and sometimes that can give you another piece of this puzzle. Which brings me to the other reason why I play through this story so many times. Each time that you get one of the endings or you take a new route in the character's story, you'll see the completion percentage go up. And if I see a completion counter going up, it causes my brain to start sparking and I have to see it all the way through.
It invokes the completionist side to everybody. I need to see 100%. Very big number. I do think it's important, though, that even if you lose, you still get something from it, as opposed to being actively punished and giving a game over, because then it's more like a frustrating experience as opposed to an enjoyable one where you're learning more about the character.
Unfortunately, you don't get 100% by fighting all the fights and getting all the endings. You get 100% by fighting all the fights, getting all the endings, and losing to every single character and seeing their unique loss dialogue. And
so you just gotta actively lose.
Well, I'm happy to say there actually is a completion bonus in this game. If you 100% a character's story, then you unlock a short interview with that character's voice actor. That's actually kind of neat.
Yeah.
ラグナーとして、ゲームの音声以外でこうストーリーモードで長く喋るということはですね、これはすなわちどういうことか、皆さんわかりますか?
Granted, the interview is with the Japanese voice actor and isn't subtitled, so this really meant nothing to me, but hey, at least it's something. That's more than a lot of other fighting games would do. Now, there is some...
I haven't seen a fighting game do that yet. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do personally enjoy watching like the voice actors just talking it out or talking about their role and stuff like that. I find it fascinating because just voice acting in general has been something I've been interested in. And a lot of them are just, they're really fun people. Like, they have cool stories to tell. And especially like the ones that love their character. Like, they can give so much more insight into how they portrayed the character and stuff like that. So yeah, neat idea. I wish more games did this.
Something else you unlock when you play through the story mode, although it's not really a bonus, more of a necessity. If you're playing through the story mode and you're getting confused by the tidal wave of new terms and vaguely referenced history that's being thrown your way, then you will unlock a mode called Teach Me Miss Lychee. This is a feature where the game explains to you what certain terms mean, give you context to the history they keep referencing. It's the kind of thing that a series like this needs. And how they convey all this information? Through sketch comedy, of course. How else would they do it? Yeah, this...
Wait, this reminds me of the extra scenes at the end of every episode of Dear Automata. Oh, God. They basically did the same thing. I wonder if this is just a common trope over in Japan? Or this is
I've
just...
seen other anime do it, yeah.
Yeah, it might be.
Setup for this is that Lychee and Tao Kaka are meeting other characters who try to teach Tao, but only after you sit through several minutes of them goofing around. Don't get me wrong, there is a charm to this, and hearing the characters actually explain historical events is more effective than just reading it on a wiki. But it was a bit annoying that I went into this wanting to learn what a hierarchical city was, and they would only tell me after sitting through a 5-minute bit about Noelle's friend getting stuck in a tree. Guys, I'm putting a retrospective together over here. I'm on the clock. Let's get a move on it. Now, once you've beaten every character's story mode at least once and gotten one of their endings, then you unlock the true ending. A true ending that leaves off on a massive cliffhanger. A massive cliffhanger that makes pretty much zero sense to you right now, but hey, that just shows how far ahead Mori had planned this story out. I mean, I'll admit, yes, a lot of the stuff you hear in this story mode is going to sound like pure nonsense floating in a word soup, but after playing through every game story and then going back and reviewing this, I gotta admit, so much of this story that sounds like gibberish actually was referencing stuff that would be explained 2 or 3 games later.
That's the thing, right? If you create a story like this and the player isn't invested enough to try and connect the dots themselves, then you might lose them in the end. But ultimately, the ones who do stick around receive something so much more than they would have otherwise. I guess it just goes to show you that you have to be more open-minded when it comes to media. Like, you might not understand things now, but maybe the creator intended for you to not understand things at the moment, and they'll give you something better later on. Don't judge a book by its cover, or judge a game by its ending after playing the entire game over and over again, right? It's a pretty big investment, but it paid off.
It's kind of wild how much was said from the start. And even wilder that Arc Sys believed in this brand new game enough that they were willing to leave it on a big to be continued.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't know how audiences would react to this. What if it bombed?
Very big gamble.
Well, luckily, this brand new venture paid off. I mentioned that the game received very positive reviews, but that doesn't necessarily always translate to sales. I mean, you can have the greatest game on the market, doesn't mean much if nobody buys it. Well, much to the delight of Arc Sys, people did buy it. A lot.
Nice.
In the first 3 years, BlazBlue Calamity Trigger sold 1.7 million copies. Which, if this was
pretty good for a
Capcom
fighting
or
game.
Bandai Namco, that would be a disappointment.
Yeah.
Good thing this was not
Those are big
Capcom
companies,
or
though.
Bandai Namco.
Yeah.
No, this was Arc Systems, and for them, this was one of the biggest successes they had ever had. As I said, they're
that
good.
was pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, the gaming industry has grown so much bigger nowadays that those numbers would be disappointing for most studios, I would say. But back then, for a fighting game too, I say it's a success.
Gear games
Yeah.
brought in critical praise and a diehard fan base, but they never brought in much money. And while all the numbers for their games aren't readily available, from what I've been able to tell, it looks like BlazBlue went on to sell more than every version of Guilty Gear X and X2 combined. And trust me, that's a lot of versions. Just to give you an idea of what a big boom this was for Arc Sys, the last
Yeah.
Guilty Gear game to come out before
That's
this
awesome.
was Double X Accent Core, and that sold 40,000 copies in Japan in its entire lifespan. BlazBlue
Ooh.
Calamity Trigger sold 60,000 copies in Japan in its first month. And these sales can largely be attributed to all the points
Damn.
that I've already laid out. The designs, the accessible combat, the story, but quite possibly the biggest boom BlazBlue got came from something that was completely outside of the devs' control, but it's the secret to success for so many titles. It's the thing that can make or break any release.
Nope.
Timing. You remember how I said that was a risk to make this a 2D fighter when it was at a time when studios were leaning heavily into 3D? Well, just a few months before BlazBlue Calamity Trigger released in arcades and on home consoles, Street Fighter IV was released. And while it used 3D models instead of sprites, it was a return to 2D combat. And it exploded. People loved this game, and as a result, 2D
So
fighting
2D
games saw
fighters.
a massive surge in popularity.
I see.
People were demanding more 2D fighters, and studios were ready to jump at this. But it takes time to make a new game. No way would anyone be able to get anything ready for at least another year. But BlazBlue had already been in the works
It's always
and was
funny when
really
you see like trend chasing studios who are making things because they think it'll make money, not because they care about the game. But they start making it when it's popular. So then 2-3 years later it comes out. It's like, no one cares about this anymore.
Yeah. You could say that there was a similar issue with Concord, where they made it after Overwatch got popular and so they wanted to capitalize on it, but way too late, and the idea for the game itself just wasn't good.
I think there's a lot of problems with what happened with Concord, but I feel like the battle royale genre, there's quite a few that you can point at in that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
A lot of gaming in general.
I mean, especially nowadays with how much longer the development cycles are, from like a year or two to being 5-10 years for a game to come out. Like, geez, no way that you're gonna know like what's popular at the time when it releases.
Yeah, it's good that development has slowed down in a lot of cases. At least Kevin, I'm trying to talk.
He's coughing up something in the back there.
I know. I lost my train of thought.
Choo choo.
It's gone. Whatever.
No. Darn you, Batman. Darn you.
just a few months later, making it line up perfectly to take advantage of this new fighting game boom.
Perfect timing.
I'm sure the game still would have sold well no matter when it was released, but yeah, there's no denying that gamers racing to stores suddenly looking for 2D fighters at the exact time that BlazBlue was
Sometimes
released
you just get that
probably helped a
perfect,
lot.
just
And these rising
everything
sales and this
aligns.
sudden surge in the fighting game genre was all Arc Sys needed to greenlight a sequel.
Perfect. And that is where we're going to call it for today. Yep. Oh, super into this, though. This is everything that I wanted to see after we learned about the story, not gonna lie.
Yeah.
Already invested in the
Definitely.
characters. I want to see how this came to be, and this video is perfectly putting it together. So hopefully we'll get to part 2 soon. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed, and we'll catch you in the next one.
Bye bye.